wider picture of tension throughout Jerusalem, which exploded on that last Monday, and now we have the violence which has been erupting throughout the area. And on this day, this afternoon, that violence also felt very keenly here.
The US has told a UN Security Council meeting that it's ready to offer support if Israel and Hamas seek a ceasefire. But China has accused the Biden administration of blocking a joint statement on the crisis. The US is Israel's most powerful ally and said a statement might hurt negotiations behind the scenes. And the actions of both Hamas and Israel were condemned at the virtual session, with council members calling for dialogue. The Palestinian foreign minister joined the meeting and begged members of the council to think about their own children while considering how to protect Palestinian children.
When you embrace your children and grandchildren tonight, please think of our children and of how you can honor those killed and spare those still alive. Think of what it feels to see your world crumbling down and not being able to protect them. Think of what it means to sleep not knowing which one of you will wake up. Remember that each time Israel hears a foreign leader speak of its right to defend itself, it is further emboldened to continue murdering entire families in their sleep.
Israel's permanent representative to the UN accused Hamas of causing the latest escalation for political gain.
This is not the first time that Hamas has indiscriminately fired deadly missiles at Israeli civilians while hiding behind Palestinian civilians. But this time, it's different. It was completely premeditated by Hamas in order to gain political power. It was all a part of their vicious plan. While Hamas seeks the destruction of the state of Israel, it's also vying to take power in the West Bank and to replace the Palestinian Authority.
Kristin Salumi has more from the United Nations.
So this is the first time that the parties to the conflict, Israel and Palestine, got to be heard in an international forum. It's the first time that members of the Security Council got to make their views known publicly, on the record, again, in this formal setting of the UN Security Council, the highest and most powerful body of the Security Council. But no action was taken on the part of the Security Council as a body. Not even a statement was issued on behalf of the Council, despite efforts by Norway, China, and Tunisia to write one. We're told that they are continuing with those efforts. The United States has blocked efforts at a unified statement, much to the frustration of many member states. Earlier in the week, they told Al Jazeera and other council members behind the scenes that they were giving space for diplomacy to work behind the scenes at the highest levels. They wanted to see an escalation of violence and thought that was the best way to achieve that. Of course, the violence has only continued, and so in the end, the United States relented, allowed this meeting to take place, and spoke before it, with the United States calling for an end to the cycle of violence.
Prolonging this current cycle of violence will only make these challenges more complex and difficult to solve, and it will only put a negotiated two-state solution further out of our reach. So the current cycle of violence must end. It is critical all parties return to working in good faith toward the vision of Israel and a Palestinian state, living side by side in peace.
For more on the response at the United Nations, we're joined by Geraldine Byrne-Nason, the Irish ambassador to the UN, live via Skype from New York. Thanks very much indeed for taking the time to talk to us on Al Jazeera. I wanted to ask you, first of all, whether you're disappointed that the UN Security Council isn't able to act and not even able to come up with a unified statement on this.
Well, yes, we're disappointed that we didn't today speak in a clear and unified voice. This is the third time we have met to discuss this ongoing crisis, a crisis that just escalates, a death toll rising, as we've heard again today, no real sign of a ceasefire. So Ireland, the Irish Foreign Minister Simon Coveney today called out for an urgent action We believe the Security Council is the body that now needs to assume its responsibility. It's a collective responsibility we have as the guardians of international peace and security. So yes, we're working hard. We would like that statement. We would like the support of the Security Council to be seen and heard by all of those affected by the crisis.
And given that President Biden talked originally about wanting to re-establish a values-based foreign policy for the US, why do you think the US is resisting, calling openly for a ceasefire?
I think this is a collective responsibility that all of us share at the Security Council. We know that the United States is a very powerful and influential player in this discussion, but today we heard from two actors in the region, from Egypt and from Jordan. Both of them are working behind the scenes. Also, my own foreign minister tirelessly during the week. So I think it will be a collective effort that will see us move forward here. An end to hostilities, a de-escalation, of course, and above all, protection of civilians. And if I may say that today, the Irish minister also stressed we're deeply concerned about the humanitarian situation on the ground. So we've heard that in your clip, even from the US ambassador today, an emphasis on the ordinary people who are bearing the brunt of this crisis. Secretary General of the UN called it risking an uncontainable humanitarian crisis. So we are working really hard behind the scenes to see if we can get the collective weight of the Security Council behind that sort of message to create the political space on the ground for a diplomatic solution.
You talk about the collective weight of the UN, but you also alluded to the fact that the US is a big player in this. Do you think the US should be sending someone more senior to the region to emphasise the need for bringing the conflict to some kind of resolution? Do you think that it's an insipid reaction so far that they've had to this?
I think that we're all trying to do our best in the circumstance. The United States makes its own decisions about, of course, its envoys. The Irish government is working hard, as we are at the Security Council, to encourage all members at the table to take initiative. We know these are complex issues. This is not a crisis that was born today. My own minister said it's the latest in a tragic cycle that shames us all. And he laid the blame at the door of the collective inertia of the international community. And I think that we need collectively again to assume our responsibility. I don't think that the international community will understand if the Security Council looks the other way or stands by as this crisis is ongoing. I know the Secretary General is very, very active. As I said, my own government is. And we've heard from the United States also that their envoy on the ground is working. So I think that we need really to ensure that the Security Council rallies now, sends a clear and a unified message from the discussion today, and then that we see very quickly a ceasefire, which is absolutely critical, and that we see humanitarian access, unimpeded humanitarian access for the humanitarian workers on the ground, particularly in Gaza, but across the occupied Palestinian territories, where there are, of course, hundreds dead, scores and scores of people injured and in need of urgent humanitarian assistance.
Just want to ask you quickly, if this isn't resolved, not just the outbreak of violence now, but the causes behind it, what do you think the risks are for the region?
This is not good news for the region. Let's be clear. The longer the violence goes on, the further we are from getting to the table and to finding a negotiated pathway to a two-state solution. Ireland has always said we see that as the only sustainable way forward, that Israel and Palestine can live side by side in dignity and in peace. And to get there, we need the hostilities to end. We need to see respect for the protection of civilians, respect for international humanitarian law, which is critical for the protection of civilians, and get back to the negotiation table. We see the solution in a two-state solution, pre-67 borders, with Jerusalem as the capital of both states. And we see that as the only sustainable pathway forward.
Ambassador Geraldine Byrne-Nason, thank you very much indeed for talking to us on Al Jazeera.
Thank you.
Nida Ibrahim is in Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. She says Palestinians there had little interest in the UN meeting.
We've seen less protests on Sunday than the ones we've been seeing over the past few days in different cities in the occupied West Bank. But Palestinians are still laying their loved ones to rest. There are 4 funerals that took place in different cities in the occupied West Bank, and the Palestinian Health Ministry says that 20 Palestinians were killed by Israeli forces' fire since the start of the latest round of escalation on last Monday. And 3,000 Palestinians, according to the same source, were injured by Israeli forces' fire. If you ask Palestinians in the street, they would tell you that they don't care to pay attention to the United Nations Security Council meeting. They point out that this body has released even resolutions that weren't implemented, the latest of which being the resolution related to the illegal Israeli settlements and their expansion on Palestinian lands. And that hasn't been implemented. On the contrary, Palestinians now are saying that they're concerned that more attacks are going to be conducted by Israeli settlers, saying that there is a sense of impunity when it comes to these settler attacks. On the official level, we've spoken to a Palestinian official who's close to Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, who says that the Palestinian Authority is still invested in the diplomatic approach of solving and de-escalation. The official we've spoken to pointed out to the call that has happened between the Palestinian president and the U.S. president. And he said it's important, it's the first call that happened between the two leaders. And he says that the Palestinian Authority is still interested in de-escalation despite its differences with Hamas. He says that the latest round of escalation has put the Palestinian issue back on the American agenda, and that he expects the U.S. envoy Hadi Amr, who has been to Tel Aviv a couple of days ago, to make his way to Ramallah and be meeting with Palestinian officials.
Coming up on this news hour from London, from viral moments to rallying cries, how the Palestine-Israel conflict is playing out on social media. 2 people are killed when a stand collapses at a crowded synagogue in an Israeli settlement. And in sport, a heavy crash takes this cyclist out of the Giro d'Italia. Jordan's king says his country is involved in intense negotiations to end the escalating violence. It's leading a diplomatic campaign with its European and US allies to pressure Israel to stop bombing Gaza. Jordanians have held regular protests against the war. What started as a peaceful demonstration near the Israeli embassy in Amman ended in violent clashes on Sunday. Security forces dispersed thousands of anti-Israel demonstrators who'd gathered in the streets. Police were seen pushing and beating some protesters who refused to leave the area. Anti-Israel protests have also been held in Pakistan's port city of Karachi. Hundreds of members of the country's largest Shia Muslim students' organisation marched in solidarity with the families of Palestinians killed in airstrikes. Protesters carried pro-Palestinian banners and set fire to Israeli-US flags. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is also playing out on social media in a way that's never been seen before. Sarah Hayat reports.
Social media is playing a big role by providing more content in real time straight from the ground and with a wider global reach than during the Israeli attacks on Gaza in 2008 and 2014. Now, within hours of our correspondent Stephanie Decker posting this video of the destruction on Saturday of the Al Jazeera and AP offices in Gaza, it went viral and has since been viewed more than 8 million times in less than 24 hours. Now, the Israeli military was quick to defend itself, as you can see here on Twitter. It claims it is only targeting Hamas. But despite that, people are showing solidarity online with those forced to flee. Now, they've been using the hashtags "journalism is not a crime" and "we demand press freedom." In fact, this photo here shows journalists just outside that destroyed building. And social media has been a massive driving force behind many of the protests elsewhere. In fact, this here, if you just have a look, was the scene, there you go, in London just hours after Saturday's attack. And in other parts of the world, hundreds of thousands of people took part in the Free Palestine marches. Celebrities have also been sharing their thoughts too. At the Football English FA Cup final on Saturday night in the UK, Leicester City's Hamza Shuri wore the Palestinian flag in solidarity. Now, a new generation also of social justice activists are using Facebook, Instagram and TikTok to drive the narrative of what's happening during this conflict. Now, it all started earlier this month when a video under the hashtag Save Sheikh Jarrah went viral, showing a Palestinian woman trying to stop a Jewish settler from taking her house. Palestinians use social media to protest against threatened forced expulsions from their homes in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in occupied East Jerusalem. And some found their Instagram stories and posts removed, and that prompted an apology from its CEO, who blamed a technical issue on the problem. But digital rights groups are unconvinced and are calling for social media sites to be more transparent about why they're taking down their posts. Now, on Thursday, Israel's Justice Minister, Benny Gantz, he held a Zoom meeting with Facebook and TikTok execs to get content critical of Israel removed. According to his spokesman, the executive said they'd act quickly and effectively to prevent incitement on their platforms. Facebook's executives are reportedly due to speak with the Palestinian Authority next week as well. Posts containing misleading or false claims from both sides during this conflict have also been widely shared online. In fact, an Israeli government spokesman shared this video on Twitter, saying it was Hamas firing rockets at Israel from populated areas. But the video was in fact from 2018 and of Syrian government forces carrying out an attack in the city of Daraa in Syria.